We have Dr. Pawan Kumar. Is he here? So his topic is the Hermeneutics of Misrepresentation of the Divine Feminine, creating an Eastern psycho-philosophical countercurrent to the Western interpretation of Śakti in Kunḍalinī Yoga. So please go ahead.
Namaste. And first of all, I would like to thank INDICA for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to share my ideas. And a lot of things have already been said about Śakti, feminine, matrikas, word, and tattvas, and also about Western interpretation. So my presentation is also about Western interpretation, but it's about dissemination of tantric knowledge in the West in the early 20th century. So when I began my doctoral research on Indian influences, especially tantric influence on the Irish poet W.B. Yeats at JNU, I realized how scholars in Indian universities are asked to accept and apply a Western theoretical and philosophical framework. As Nagaraj Paturiji mentioned in his inaugural address yesterday, anything that is imported from the West becomes the norm, the idea, the theory. During my research, I observed some of the Western scholars misunderstand and misinterpret Indian philosophy, especially tantric philosophy, and within that domain especially, merely sexualizing the divine feminine, all of which is extremely experiential and subjective for a sadhak or practitioner. From this unrest was born the idea of this paper. So in my presentation, I will talk about Kunḍalinī Yoga, and especially from the perspective of creativity and creative inspiration. In Kunḍalinī Yoga, Śakti is the source of knowledge or consciousness. The feminine energy in Kunḍalinī Yoga plays a significant role in the process. A realization of this feminine power helps the practitioner in the enhancement of the cognitive power and the elasticity of imagination. And imagination is really important for any creative writer. The philosophy and the practices of the tantric tradition are based on the psychosomatic understanding of the human mind and body. In ancient texts like Tantralok, Spandkarikas, and Vijnana Bhairav, to name a few of the many, the nature of Śakti has been described and discussed from different vantage points. In Tantra philosophy, the divine Śakti is the manifestation of different forms of energy and symbolized as Maya, Mahamaya, Matrikas, Mahavidya, Chausat Yogini, Devi, Parasakti, Kali, and through many more images and symbols. Śakti is the eternal principle and essence of the microcosm and macrocosm, perceivable and the beyond. Swami Lakshmanju Maharaj in his Kunḍalinī Vigyan Rahashyam explains the creative energy as described by Avinav Gupta, Swatah Mana, Swatah Mani, Swatah Ma Keshapo, Vaisargi Sthiti, which means to create the self from the self in the self is the reality of creative energy. Thus, creating self in self from self is the definition of creative energy. Gopinath Kaviraj describes the concept of pratibha as a flash of light, a revelation. So in order to write something, in order to create something phenomenal, you need that divine inspiration as a writer, as an artist. In other words, he says, Pratibha, otherwise known as Parasamvid or Chiti Shakti, means in the Agam, especially in the Tripura and the Trika section of it, the power of self-revelation or self-illumination. Yes, definitely, sir. Self-revelation or self-illumination of the Supreme Spirit. Which it is essentially and eternally identical. In Spandkarikas, the Spand has been described as the divine creative pulsation. In the philosophical conversation between Bhairav and Bhairavi in Vigyan Bhairav Tantra, Śakti acts as the reservoir of knowledge in the form of the inquirer or seeker. And at the same time, in this dialogue, Bhairavi or Śakti symbolically represents the desire for knowledge as well as the source of knowledge. So she is the one who pervades everything. Thus Bhairav and Bhairavi are one form from the standpoint of knowledge. The dissolution of this distinction leads to self-realization and divine knowledge. And when I am using the word dissolution, so I am using this word in terms of striking a balance. So we will have to strike a balance between the feminine and the masculine principle or the aspect in order to understand the reality that a writer perceives. Western interpretation of Tantra philosophy and Kunḍalinī Yoga in particular are based on distinctions, dichotomies, and modern theoretical premises. In popular Western imagination, Tantra is projected as an exotic, erotic practice, which has led to gross misinterpretation of the highly nuanced philosophy that Tantra actually is. In some cases, the latent motive behind the superimposition of Western theories is to sensationalize, scandalize, and subvert the Eastern philosophical discourse of the feminine. In order to understand the trajectory of the gross misinterpretation of Tantra by the West, one needs to bear in mind that the development of Western psychology is coeval with the dissemination of Tantra philosophy in the West, particularly in Europe and America. Thus, the demotion of Tantra from the status of philosophy to merely an occult, esoteric, black magic, witchcraft, sexual rituals, and practices in the popular imagination of the West can be understood by examining the stock misinterpretation of ancient Indian Tantric texts, especially the feminine principle, by some of the Western scholars and pseudo-practitioners. In fact, and this was part of my doctoral research, during the late 19th and early 28th centuries, Tantric knowledge was also appropriated by Western esoteric and occult societies as a newfound erotic and exotic elixir. So in the second section of my presentation, I will talk about Kunḍalinī Yoga and Western spiritual, esoteric and occult societies in the early 20th century. Sir, please change the slide. So next slide. So as I said, that the Western psychology is, in order to understand the development of Western psychology, we will also have to understand the dissemination of Tantric information and knowledge. So on October 12, 1932, the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung in his lecture made a poignant remark that the Eastern and Western minds are different. He observes, and I quote him, "If you think in those terms, you build up an apparent Hindu system with the psychology of the Western mind, and you cannot do that. You simply poison yourself." This poisoning of mind is because of the psychological conditioning and cultural differences. According to Hindu Tantric tradition, the experience related to Kunḍalinī is subjective and personal in nature. But the general interpretation or an attempt to make it a ready-made spiritual product for modern consumers metamorphosed it into a philosophy of abstract ideas. The Theosophical Society borrowed the idea of Kunḍalinī and westernized it to suit the spiritual needs of the Western world. I will give a few examples here. Take for instance H.P. Blavatsky, who in the Secret Doctrine describes the concept of Fouhard, the cosmic electricity, in terms of Kunḍalinī. And there are lots of other examples where she just borrows ideas from a Tantric tradition and she is just trying to give it a Western touch for the Western audience. Next slide, sir. Andreas Mayer draws attention to how Rudolf Steiner in his 1906 in a handwritten note has connected the biblical image of the tree of life with Kunḍalinī. He writes, "The opposite path from below upward is by contrast connected with the tree of life. Kunḍalinī initiation alters and initiates configuration of supersensible bodies by reintegrating the qualities of the tree of life that were lost at fall." So just think of it Rudolf Steiner in 1906, he is trying to connect the story of Genesis, the Christian story of Genesis, with the Kunḍalinī yoga, because he's saying at fall it's like the Kunḍalinī moved from Sahasrara to Mooladhara, and now it will move from Mooladhara to Sahasrara. So basically the idea of feminine in Christian idea, or the Christian story of Genesis, you will find that the feminine is represented as something negative, responsible for the fall of mankind. And in Kunḍalinī, she is the one who is giving information, she is the one who is the source of liberation. So Rudolf Steiner has connected both the things. And even there is this book by Satya Prakash Singh, he has translated Tantra Lok. So you can read his book. In his book also he has discussed about these things, about how the story of Genesis, Christian story of Genesis, is related to Kunḍalinī Yoga. Another example is George S. Arundale. So Arundale was the president of Theosophical Society from 1934 to 1935, and in order to describe the Great White Lodge, it was a theosophical and new age movement. So basically, in order to describe this society or group, he used the idea of Kunḍalinī, and he says the mighty force of the Kunḍalinī of the brotherhood flows through the centers and through each member, so that admission to the brotherhood involves participants in this great flow, the gradual uniting of the consciousness of the individual with the consciousness of the brotherhood. So there are lots of other examples where we can see that Theosophical Society borrowed ideas from Tantric tradition, and they appropriated these ideas. But at the same time, there is also this possibility that maybe they were interested in Tantric tradition or Tantric knowledge, but obviously we can say with certainty that their methodology was flawed. Christopher Patridge, in his essay Orientalist Discourse in Early Theosophy, sheds light on the theosophical hegemonization of Eastern knowledge. And he says that even Theosophical Society, they funded translation project and other things just in order to hegemonize the Eastern ideas, or the core ideas, or the metaphysical idea of the Orient. So next slide. In the Hermetic order of the Golden Dawn, it was an occult order, and renowned poets like W.B. Yeats and writers, they were associated with this society, the Hermetic order of the Golden Dawn. So Kunḍalinī was used as a meditation technique to visualize Christ. In the side lectures of the Golden Dawn, Kunḍalinī Yoga became a meditation ritual. So as you can see that basically, in my last slide, I will discuss about how Kunḍalinī is related to Tattva, Matrikas, Varna. But in Golden Dawn, they were aware about all these things, but they borrowed these ideas, but they couldn't develop a systematic, you can say, a meditation technique. So they were aware about Tattvas, they were aware about meditation technique based on Tattva. And W.B. Yeats, Irish poet, he practiced, he used these cards in order to write poems. So there are evidences. Sir, next slide, please. Yes, as you can see in these meditation technique, the last line, there is reference about Kunḍalinī, but the idea is if you are practicing, if you are doing Kunḍalinī Yoga, so their idea is at the end of the process you will visualize Christ. But how is it even possible? That because at the end of the day it's about striking a balance, and obviously Christ is not Ardhanarishwar. You will have to visualize something like that. And it's about personal experience. As I said, it's something that is subjective, it's something that is personal. So everybody will see something different. But at the end of the day, it has to be something related to feminine and the masculine, something that is about balance. So in fact, the notorious occultist Aleister Crowley, who was also a member of the Golden Dawn, for a brief period used eroticized version of Kunḍalinī Yoga to influence his disciples and followers. According to Hugh Urban, Crowley more or less accepted this basic system of 7 chakras and the serpent power, yet quite remarkably, he also adds a special set of lower chakras located beneath the lowest energy center. So they borrowed, they appropriated, and at the same time, people like Aleister Crowley, they also misinterpreted and distorted the entire Kunḍalinī yoga system. So in contrast to the gross debasement of Tantra and Kunḍalinī Yoga in particular, by most Western scholars, we have people, and you can say scholars, like John Woodruff, pseudonym Arthur Evelyn, who was initiated into the Śakti tradition of Bengal Tantra, also disseminated tantric knowledge through his magnificent translation of ancient tantric texts with the help of Indian pundits. In his book Śakti and Śakti, Woodruff aptly highlights the importance of Kunḍalinī as, I quote, a subject of the highest importance in Tantra Shastra, and without some knowledge of which much of its ritual will not be understood. So the idea is, people like John Woodruff, they work because he was someone who was initiated into the tradition. So he's someone who is like, if you will read his book, Is India a Civilized Culture? So when you will read his books, you will find that he is like, okay, there is something called left-hand Tantra, Vamchar, but at the same time you will also have to accept that Tantra is in itself is a philosophy. It's a school of philosophy. It's not just about sexual rituals. It's not just about alcohol or meat or about left-hand things. It's a philosophy, and in order to understand that, you will have to understand the intricacies of tantric rituals. So from the above discussion, it is evident that in the early 20th century, there were two currents of discourses related to Kunḍalinī. On the one hand, Kunḍalinī Yoga was appropriated and intelligently engrafted onto Western esoteric occult philosophy, and on the other hand, some scholars made an in-depth study of the same to understand the Eastern mind and knowledge system. So my last section is about need for the Eastern psychophilosophical discourse. Sir, please change the slide. Next slide, sir. Next. So, as I said, in order to understand this particular phase, you will have to understand it through people like John Woodruff, Carl Jung, because Carl Jung, he was very much clear about the fact that there is a difference between Eastern and Western mind. And he also said, for example, while talking about Tattva, he is saying that what is abstract for us, for the Western mind, it's a reality for the Eastern mind. So in order to do that, there are lots of things that we can do in order to develop this counter psychoanalytical premise or theory. So first thing is, we will have to understand that our concept of reality is different from them. Our idea of unconsciousness is different from their idea of unconsciousness. Our idea of reality is completely different from their idea of reality, because they try to see everything from the physical perspective, from the perspective of the phenomenal world, and it's a problem in itself, because we believe in things like, for example, we believe in the idea of supra-consciousness, something that is beyond, something that is not perceivable, something that is not commensurable. So we will have to see all these things, because it's not that simple. There are people like Hume, there are people like John Woodruff. So it's not like that everybody is just trying to misinterpret our text or tantric tradition. So Kunḍalinī is a psychophilosophical concept which is non-dual in its representation of the feminine-masculine principle. The Western duality and the logocentric approach have made the study of Tantra, and especially Kunḍalinī, more of an esoteric pseudo-practice in the West, which has led to the mushrooming of numerous wellness centers which appropriate a skewed understanding of Tantra and Kunḍalinī Yoga. Just to further their profits, Another reason for misinterpretation is the reliability on the secondary material, and especially the one written by Western scholars. So generally they don't refer to texts written in vernacular language, and it's a big problem because they rely on secondary material. They rely on, for example, if you'll read Jeffrey Kripal, he's talking about Kunḍalinī as something that is mystico-erotic in nature. Okay, and then he will say that, okay, some Swami said this vague argument, how is it to substantiate this argument? It's not possible. So first thing is they rely on secondary material. They don't quote texts written in vernacular language. And as I said, that academicians like Jeffrey J. Kripal, in the name of psychological interpretation or psychological biography, have painted Tantra and Kunḍalinī Yoga as the mystico-erotic union of Shiva and Śakti. And in his book, Kali's Child, the mystical and the erotic in the life and teachings of Ramakrishna, you will find that he just puts himself on the high academic and intellectual pedestal. And he says that if Ramakrishna were alive and could fully understand what follows, this work would deeply affect him, for he could then read his life through the lens of mind and see things he never saw before. And another statement is, I think it is clear now that they are not always conscious of the latent meanings of their own symbols and rituals, at least in the same way that a psychoanalytically trained observer like me might be. So, sir, next slide, please.
He's at least frank about his madness.
So when I am saying a counter current, so the thing is, we will have to understand that Kunḍalinī is not just about the union of Shiva and Śakti and that erotic thing which Westerners want us to believe. Because in this book, The Little Goddess, written by K.C. Aryan, you'll find that the way he has weaved the idea of Kunḍalinī, he talks about matrikas, varna. Sir, next slide, please. Yes, so in every chakra there are alphabets, and you will find that there is a presiding deity of every chakra. So when you say that Śakti, she rises from Mooladhara to Sahasrara, it's not like that. It's about every deity, presiding deity. You are just trying to concentrate on that deity, and then you are trying to, another important thing is, this is also about when you try to give energy to a particular word, because we don't believe in alphabets just as something that is abstract. We try to energize that mantra. It's also about formation of mantra, because it's also related to tattvas. Okay, so I was talking about the way how the Golden Society appropriated this idea of tattva. So it's also related to that. It's also related to the idea of color. So Kunḍalinī Yoga is not just about moving of Shakti from Mooladhara to Sahasrara. It's about mantras, formation of mantras. It's about philosophy of contemplation. You contemplate on something. Tantra believes in the idea of stretching your imagination. So when you stretch your imagination, you are in a position to see things that are not perceivable. So you form mantras, and that's why I said that maybe there is a possibility that we will find that there are lots of diversity. So matrikas are not same in every sect or in every community, because people, they develop their own mantras. People, they see things from different perspective, maybe. So because of that, Kunḍalinī Yoga is something that is personal. It's something that is very subjective in nature, very individualistic in nature. You see something. So that's why it's called Leela. And this is the most important aspect about Kunḍalinī, because see, when you are seeing something, because Leela is also, you can also say that it's a performance. So when you are seeing that thing, you are the audience, and at the same time you are also the stage on which that Leela is taking place. So you will have to visualize. It's about contemplation, it's about philosophy of colors, it's about letters, it's about formation of mantras, and it's about lots of things. It's about your imagination, the way you can stretch your imagination. So
Babaji, are you coming to the conclusion?
yes, sir. Another important thing is, if you will read Swami Lakshmanju's book, you'll find that he also talks about 3.5 coil of the snake. And this 3.5 coil, it represents the different aspects of our consciousness. So that's why I said that Kunḍalinī is not that simple. And another important thing is that Kunḍalinī Yoga is not something that is like something which is a separate yoga practice or process. There are lots of things related to it, and I will give you some of the examples. For example, Viparit Karini Mudra, the attitude of inversion. Chakra Anusandhan, the discovery of chakras. Nad Sanchalan, conducting the sounds of consciousness, conducting the breath consciousness. Shabd Sanchalan, Mahamudra, Mahabhed Mudra, the great piercing attitude. And Śakti Chalini, conduction of the thought force. So I would like to conclude by saying that yesterday Sushumna ji has rightly pointed out that when Shakuntala stood in the court of Dushyant, she said, I am my own witness. So our ancient texts are their own witness. We don't have to take some theoretical framework from some other institution, or so to say, from some other people. So we can interpret our text, but the thing is, we will have to understand our text in a holistic way, in a holistic manner, and we will have to do this rigorously. Thank you so much.
That was an excellent paper, Pawan Kumar ji, Dr. Pawan Kumar ji. Actually, I received many messages from the audience also that this Jeffrey Kripal thing actually has to be taken very seriously. And I think most of you already know that Sri Rajiv Malhotra has taken it up, worked on it for a very long time, and the guy has been shamed already enough, but we have to do more. We have to do more. We cannot leave him just like that. Yeah, please.
So there's a book called, which is kind of countering this particular book called Kali's Child, which is interpreting Ramakrishna, revisiting Kali's Child, written by Swami Tyagananda and Pravrajika.
Yeah, I know that book. Yes.
So they have point-wise, they have countered whatever Kripal has.
Yes. Yeah.
After it, because I've read both the books, and I found out that his knowledge of Bengali is so poor that his translations are all flawed.
Yeah, that is why we should go to him for tuition. That is what he is saying. Yeah, because he does not know Bengali. Those who do not know Sanskrit want to give us tuition in Sanskrit. Those who do not know Vedas want to give us tuition in Vedas. And this guy who does not know Bengali wants to teach us about Ramakrishna. Yeah. So.
No, but I want to just ask, it might seem a bit frivolous, but are these people that important also?
Okay, see, the people who are concerned, those who are asking me to react or INDICA Academy should react and all that, their concern is that those books are being taken seriously, at least by some youngsters. Some of these books are in the airport book-stalls, and when these youngsters go to study abroad, these people are already in the positions of power in academia, and those books are offered as study material to them. So if the uninitiated youngsters take them seriously, they are misled. So that is the concern basically. But fortunately, countering material is also coming out, as he has rightly pointed out. Ramakrishna Mission itself has reacted, and Raju Malhotra has taken it up in a very big way, and lots of things have been done and more needs to be done. Brahmachari Prashant ji from Amrita University was saying we should take it up as a movement to expose this fellow and all that. But yeah, we have to, it is already getting exposed, he is already getting exposed.